Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. This video is about two long-lost twins. The Frank throwing axeman, which has been around since the release of Age of Kings, and the Malian Gebeto, which is a relative newcomer in the African Kingdoms expansion. I'll be looking at their stats, hidden attributes, and how they do in some different situations. Let's check them out. The reason I say they're long-lost twins is they're both unique in the sense that they're ranged infantry units. They both attack from a distance, but do melee damage, almost as if they were swordsmen up close. That means they're affected by upgrades at the barracks, like squires and arson, as well as the infantry technologies at the blacksmith. The fact that they're not actually archers means they're unaffected by thumb ring, fletching, chemistry, ballistics, or any other technology normally associated with archers. The ranged infantry thing really messes with people's expectations, and often their first instinct is to go for anti-archer units, like skirmishers or rams, but those have high pierce armor, which does nothing to help against Gebetos or throwing axemen. Now they aren't the only examples of units like this. The Mamluk and Kamyuk also do melee damage from range, but they feel like pretty different units to me with different roles, whereas the throwing axemen and Gebeto are very similar to the eye test. The question is, who does it better? Well, let's just have them fight each other. With equal numbers, the throwing axeman wins. Done. Thanks for watching, guys, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Why do these videos take me 2 weeks to make? Just kidding. That's an interesting result, but let's take a closer look before drawing any conclusions. If we compare their stats side by side, we see the HP of the throwing axeman is much higher. It's double in the Castle Age and 56% more in Imperial Age. That automatically makes it a tankier unit, and one you don't need to worry about quite as much. The Malian attack, on the other hand, looks quite a bit higher initially. Unfortunately though, they miss out on the final attack upgrade, so once all the upgrades are factored in, it's only 25% more. Their armor is pretty comparable, with throwing axemen having one more against melee, and the Gebeto has one more range, with the elite throwing axeman's unique tech bringing them up to a total of 5. That's a lot of give and take with the stats, and you might assume it balances out. Interestingly, the developers at least seem to be implying the Gebeto is better, since it costs 60% more gold per unit and 13% more overall. That might not make a lot of sense based on the stats so far, but consider the throwing axeman has a more expensive elite upgrade cost, as well as a unique tech for its +1 range. You'll also need Blast Furnace, which the Malians don't have. Altogether, that means fully upgrading your elite throwing axeman costs 775 food and gold more. That's the equivalent of about 17 Gebetos. In that light, I think their higher cost starts to make a bit of sense. To dig a bit deeper in their hidden attributes, they both have an identical creation time of 17 seconds, identical fire rates, and they're both pretty light on secret bonus damage. The throwing axeman gets slightly more against buildings and eagle warriors in Imperial Age, but overall there isn't too much under the hood of either unit. One big difference though is their movement rate. Gebetos are very fast for infantry, whereas the throwing axeman is fairly average. When you combine that with what we saw about their HP and attack, you start to get a sense they're not as similar as they first appear and can play very different roles. I think of the Gebeto as more of a cavalry archer hit and run sort of unit, helped out with higher attack, more range, and faster movement. They work well in small groups and can hit and run nearly every other infantry unit, while also being able to escape from archers. Even cavalry can have a hard time chasing them down. The cheaper upgrades also complement that style, and you can feel more comfortable getting the elite upgrade even if you only intend to make a smaller number of them. The only issue I have with their rating potential is the relatively long delay between your commands and when they actually fire. It makes them a little bit annoying to use sometimes, and means you can lose efficiency with too much micromanagement. And while I'm on the topic of things I don't like about them, I also don't like that I think I'm losing villagers every time one of them dies. Now compare all that hit and run to the throwing axeman, which will have a much harder time chasing down villagers. I see them potentially as the bulk of an army, expensive to tech into, but giving you good value over the long run. Of course, these units are also operating within their civilization's tech trees, and the throwing axeman is supported by beefy Frank paladins, whereas the Malians have a much wider range of viable units. Now, just to help you guys get a reasonable intuition of what you can expect from each unit, I thought I'd run some tests on a variety of situations and see which one has the edge. Of course, in any fight, the Gebeto has the added advantage of speed, meaning it's easier to micro and can generally avoid unfavorable fights. Ignoring that important point for the moment, let's see how they perform. I'll start off by testing them against the trash units. Against halberdiers from a distance, the Gebeto does 12 damage instead of the throwing axeman's 9. That means as long as you have something to protect them in front, the Gebeto is the better support unit, taking down halberdiers faster. Now, because that's true against every unit, I'm gonna stop pointing it out. If we remove the barriers though, the Gebeto's lower HP means they go down significantly faster. Both are okay against halberdiers, even up close, but the throwing axemen are definitely better, and I would argue that Gebeto's gold cost makes it ineffective in the long term. In their case, I think you have to use some micromanagement or have units in front if you want a good exchange in the long run. Looking at skirmishers now, they're both incredibly efficient against them, even outnumbered 2 to 1. If there's one takeaway of this video, it's that it's not a great idea to counter Gebetos or throwing axemen with skirmishers. The throwing axemen do take 24 hits instead of the Gebeto's 15 to go down, but the trade-off is Gebetos take down skirmishers in 3 hits instead of the axemen's 4. Overall, axemen have the advantage, but they're both good choices. To finish off the triumvirate of trash, against Hussars, Gebetos do 33% more damage. Once the Hussars get close though, Gebetos can't fight off an equal number, while throwing axemen can. Personally, I was impressed that both held up as well as they did. Another unit they're fairly good against is the Eagle Warrior, and even up close they end up trading very well with Incas, though they lose to the Mayans once they're up close. They also tend to do quite well against the elite Huscarl. The last one they're at least sort of good against is Champions. The Champions barely survive in up-close melee fights, which means if you're using your range at all, it's probably going to be a good exchange for the Gebeto and Axemen. Based on the test though, I wouldn't say any of those units has a big advantage over another. Now, something that a player very unfamiliar with Gebetos might try is Rams, thinking about how good they are against other ranged units for soaking up arrows. That would be a very bad choice in this case though, considering those two units are doing melee damage. In addition, the fact that these are unique units is an extra added bonus because they can be created at a castle that's being attacked by rams. So those are more or less the two unit strengths, but what about their weaknesses? I'd say they're pretty similar in respect to those as well. They're definitely both weak against onagers in large numbers, though I'd take the Gebeto over the Axemen because of the faster speed and higher attack. Even if you're keeping a close eye on them though, it's still dangerous. If your opponent is massing up Gebeto or throwing Axemen, I would say onagers are a good choice. Another pretty good unit that isn't mutually exclusive is the Arbalest. Open field tests like this don't really capture how good they are, especially if you can make use of their extra range. They also don't require castles, which means they're much easier to mass up in the long run. If you can put some units in front of the archers for the Gebetos and Axemen to aim at, and make use of the archers' extra range, it can be a pretty good counter. In this particular situation, the throwing Axemen's HP makes them more resistant, though again I think Gebetos have an edge for being able to escape if need be. One of their biggest differences I've found is against hand cannoneers. Gebeto's low HP and the hand cannoneers plus 10 bonus against infantry means they go down in 2 hits. A throwing axeman on the other hand takes a slightly more impressive 4. As you can see, that leads to a huge difference in their effectiveness. The last one here could go either way, and it's the Scorpion. On small scales, the melee damage deals with them very quickly. On the other hand, with enough Scorpions, it's impossible for them to get close enough for that, so you really have to use your own discretion on that one. So those were the main units I was curious about. I think there's a little bit of hype around the Gebeto right now because they're relatively new, and in melee fights the tests show the throwing axeman generally holds up better. The extra attack doesn't make up for less HP when you have close sustained combat. That's not a knock on the Gebeto, but it means you should be actively looking for ways to use their extra speed and attack to your advantage, and be more careful about leaving them in the middle of a fight for any extended period. I think that's sort of common sense, but it's nice to see that the numbers support that. The times I've seen the Gebeto used most effectively was in smaller groups as an annoying harassment unit, baiting units out of position or picking off villagers. In that case, the normal counters like archers, onagers, and even cavalry just can't force a proper engagement. So hopefully that helps you out next time you're using or playing against either of those units. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.